Hey folks, this is the video lecture on Marilyn Waring. I was originally going to assign this as a reading, but I decided not to in order to kind of make some sanity room for everybody. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. I'll keep it as short as possible and stick to the absolutely critically important things that are core to her work. All right. So Marilyn Waring was a feminist economist, in fact, arguably one of the first feminist economists, along with Nancy Folber and a number of other folks who looked carefully at how labor, also known as work, and other forms of monetary compensation fall differently to men and women. Specifically, the feminist economist aspects that we're going to be talking about today are about women's work, but a little bit more about Waring first. Waring is a New Zealander. She was born in 1952 and she's still living. A principal founder of feminist economics, as I mentioned, and a former member of the New Zealand Parliament. So fun little tidbit here. In 1975, at age 23, she was elected to Parliament as a member of New Zealand's Conservative Party. Interestingly, she was elected and worked very hard for a platform that was anti-nuclear. So conservative in New Zealand may not mean what we think of as conservative here. In 1988, her most famous book, If Women Counted, also known as Counting for Nothing, was released. And she's been working on this theme ever since for most of her career. The theme is the way that unpaid work traditionally is done by women, and then actually gets made invisible within national accounting systems. So systems we come up with, like the gross domestic product, don't track the kind of work that women do, typically, for many, many hours each week in the domestic setting. So we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. All right. Gross domestic product is one of the biggest forms of measurement here. And you hear people talk about gross domestic product and GDP an awful lot. So what kind of work is this that traditionally doesn't get measured? Waring says these are domestic and personal services that do not count when they are produced and consumed within the same household. So if you pay me to come clean your house, that counts economically. If I clean my own house, that does not count economically, right? She says women all over the planet perform the bulk of these tasks, and again, they only get counted when they get hired outside the home, or even sometimes when they're produced by government agencies, etc. So cooking in a restaurant counts, cooking at home doesn't. So there's going to be a list here of some of the things that she describes in her 2003 article, Counting for Something, in which she argues that these can be counted. We can come up with a way to count these. It's not they're uncountable. We've just chosen not to count them because the people designing the measurement systems for economic measures were valuing a certain kind of work and not this other kind of work. So these include cleaning, decoration, and maintenance of the dwelling occupied by the household. If I decorate my own home, that doesn't get counted. If I'm an interior decorator and I decorate your home, that gets counted. If I clean my own home, that doesn't get counted. If I clean your home, it does. Cleaning, servicing, and repair of household goods, right? So men might be involved in some of these things, but it's worth noting that they're typically the ones that must be done every day, kind of drippity, drippity, drippity on a regular basis, and therefore are the most time-consuming overall, are ones that tend to be gendered as women's work. Dishes, for instance. Yard work doesn't have to be done every day, right? Planting, cutting, mowing, maybe once a week, you can stagger it. But dishes have to be done every day, laundry almost every day, or you get behind, especially if you're not the only one in the household. In addition, men are often not taught how to do these tasks, but girls are. From a very young age, we see that chores are divided up in these kinds of ways. And so when boys grow up to become men, they don't know how to wash the laundry without causing the darks to bleed on the whites and ruining clothes. So for instance, women will often in heterosexual households just take over these tasks so that they, quote, get done right, you know. Preparation and serving of meals is another kind of task like this. Care, training, and instruction of children, another task like this, gets measured outside the home, but not inside. If you're thinking to yourself, wait, I'm looking at these jobs, and even when you measure them, they get paid less than other kinds of jobs, you're absolutely right. Women's work is not valued as much, even when it's paid outside the home. Care of the sick, infirm, or old people. So this is like the long daily grind, not the kind of expert go to the doctor a couple times a year stuff, which tends to get paid more. If we're talking specifically about the long daily grind of turning people, helping people go to the bathroom, caring for sores, doing physical therapy for people who are recovering from injuries, this tends overwhelmingly to be done and overseen by women, both in a profession where they get paid and also in the home. In fact, in the US, little bit of tidbit, most doctor's appointments are made by women for their children, but also for adult men in the household. Many American men do not know how to make their own doctor's appointments and do not make their doctor's appointments without the supervision or scaffolding of women. Transportation of members of the household or their foods and goods is another thing that Waring lists in this 2003 article, Counting for Something, as a kind of labor that only gets accounted for when it's paid, and even then may not be paid very much. Right? So she gives this example of a woman in the developing world. I think it's easier for us to see how these apply to ourselves if we're not familiar with what things are like in places where people don't have running water regularly. So I'm going to give you a description of how this might work in a place in the world where there's not safe running water. Okay. This is from Waring's article. She says, a woman wakes. She breastfeeds her 4-month-old child, which is unproductive, inactive primary production according to measures, consumed by a member of the household. Right? There's no accurate way of ascribing value to this. There's no really broad and robust market for breast milk the way there is for formula, where we could take that and then use it to assign a value to this. The woman goes to collect water. She uses some to wash dishes from the family evening meal. That's unproductive work, right? And the pots in which she previously cooked a little food for sale, that's informal work. Right? So she's selling it at the farmer's market or something. It might not even be showing up. Next, she goes to the nearby grove to collect bark for dye for materials to be woven for sale. That's informal work, which she mixes then with half a bucket of water, again from her informal work, fetching the water. Right? She also collects some roots and leaves to make an herbal medicine for her child, which is actually seen as inactive economically. It doesn't produce anything or contribute anything to the community at large, right? It's all produced and consumed inside the household. She uses the other half of the bucket of water to make this concoction. Again, it was generated for and consumed within the household. It's totally invisible. Right? She will also collect some dry wood to build the fire, to boil the water, to make both the medicine and the dye. And all this time, she will carry the baby on her back. This is clearly labor, but it's not getting measured. It's incredibly time consuming, but it's not getting measured. It even requires some skill in some cases, but it's not getting measured. So this is the kind of stuff that Waring's talking about all over the world, not just in the developed world, but in the developing world. These kinds of tasks happen. And of course, when these household tasks have to be done without the benefit of machinery, when you have to fetch your own water instead of having clean running water come into your house, it's much more time consuming. So the number of hours in the day that you have to spend on so-called productive work are much smaller. So let's take a look at some numbers from the US. Men's work at home and at work, and women's work at home and at work. I'm going to just briefly point out a couple of features here. Hopefully you can see my little mouse pop up, and you can see that men's paid work, men are working fewer hours per week on average than they used to. Things are a little more efficient, right? Their time on housework has gone up. Their time on childcare has barely gone up. Women's childcare has stayed roughly steady this entire time, right? Over a 50-year period, pretty much. Women's housework has gone down. This is thought to be largely due to mechanization, because you can see that the amount it's gone down is not comparable to the amount that it's gone up for men. And their paid work has gone up, but it's still nothing like men's paid work. So, it's worth kind of thinking about this. If we look at the actual numbers that are reflected in these graphs, I'm reading from the article that I took these graphs from right now. In 1968, 37% of working age married women with young children were employed, and in 2011, it was about 65%. Right? And while more mothers are working for pay, actually the amount of time that parents spend with children on average is going up. So you see both, men are spending a little more time on childcare, women are spending a little more as well. Let's see. The average amount of time spent taking care of children has been relatively stable for women, again, ranging from 5 to 6 hours per week. And because not all men or women have children, the average childcare time for all is much lower than it is for parents. So this 5 to 6 hours per week is going to be not what the actual female parent spends, or the actual male parent, right? But is going to average in those who don't have children. So what we actually find in terms of the number of hours for people who do have children is that married fathers' time spent on childcare increases from 2.6 hours to 7.2 hours during this period. Single mothers' time with their children increases from 5.8 hours to 11.3 hours. All right. Single fathers' time expands from less than 1 hour per week to about 8 hours per week. Those numbers are not on this chart, but I'm going to give them to you as a little bit extra. So we're actually spending more time with our kids. Each parent is spending more time with our kids now than we used to in the, quote, golden age of parenting. So you've got this kind of expansion of care work at the same time that that care work remains invisible. All right, so take-home points. We see work when it's paid or consumed outside the laborer's own household, but not when it isn't. And Waring wants us to know it is possible to measure these things and value them, but we don't. Even when these types of labor are visible economically, they tend to receive low pay. Childcare, for instance, is expensive, but childcare workers make relatively low wages. Teachers get paid very little compared with a lot of other careers. You've probably heard about K through 12 teachers, kindergarten through 12th grade teachers, having to spend their own salary to buy classroom supplies, or having to be on food stamps in order to make ends meet. Non-technical nursing staff and other personal care workers get paid very little, and they have demanding jobs with poor benefits and physically exhausting labor. And there are also social benefits to caregivers, like welfare and food stamps in the US, that are very low. Receiving these kinds of benefits is seen as humiliating, or as a safety net for people who couldn't hack it or something like that, or who had bad luck. Nothing there is about the actual kind of structures in which people are having to perform this kind of labor, namely caregiving, and you don't get welfare if you're just sitting around with no kids, right? It's very much of an emphasis on the shame of having to ask for help, not the shame of the system that doesn't support us adequately. Right, so we're going to see more about that in Katay's work this week. Thanks for your attention, and I hope this has helped. All right, see you guys around.